Clint Gass, and this is the 9th day of August in 1997.
I'm Chloris Harmsen. I'm Clint's sister. You didn't tell how old you are.
No.
I am 85.
Our grandfather and grandmother Gass came from Germany. They came from a little town of Rockenhausen. It was in Bavaria when Bavaria extended beyond the Rhine River west, but it's no longer in Bavaria. It's sort of north of Kaiserslautern. The family was, they were farmers there, and they came to the United States in about 1882, I think, because Dad was the first child born in the United States. They settled in Alta, on a farm near Alta, Iowa. And that's where they were living when Dad at 18 took off and went up to Minnesota to get the property.
When they came from Germany, they came on a boat. They came steerage. They had no money. Actually, I think they came to escape starvation. And they had two small children, and our grandmother's parents, and her grandfather, who was at that time 82 years old. And I don't know how long it took them to come. It was a steamboat. But they brought every bite of food with them that they ate on the boat.
And these people are all buried in the Lake Wilson Cemetery in Minnesota. Let's talk about the Burkes, the other side of the family.
Well, our grandfather came over by himself as a young man, and there must have been a reason for his changing his name. His name was Benson, but when he came to this country, he changed his name to Burke. That maybe he didn't want anybody to know he was Swedish. Burke was an English name, but I don't know his reason. But he went to Chicago, and he was a carpenter, and he often told that he planted trees in Garfield Park in Chicago at the time he came over here. And he was married in Chicago, and he and his wife had a child who was our Uncle Willie, our mother's half-brother. And in time they had two more children, but both of them died. And when the third child died, the mother died too. So our grandfather was left with this little boy who was probably 5 years old. And by this time he had moved to Des Moines, and that's where he met our grandmother. And she had come over with several other young women, and they were working in a candy factory in Des Moines. And he married my grandmother. And I don't know how long they lived in Des Moines. Not long, because my mother was the second one in the family, and they had left Des Moines and had moved to our part of Minnesota, Murray County, by the time Mother was born.
Grandpa was born in Helsingborg, wasn't he? Or Gothenburg. Gothenburg.
We know little about our parents until about the time our dad came from Iowa. And Dad drove a team of horses and a wagon, and came by himself when he was about 19 years old.
Yes, he was born in 1883, the 18th of June, 1883, on his mother's birthday.
That is right.
Dad told about how long the winters were up there, and they each got a violin. They were going to learn how to play. And Uncle Walt started sawing away, and boy, he could play in no time. And Dad worked and worked and worked, and he never got a sweet note out of that violin.
No, he tried so hard, and the rest of them were all musical. Uncle Henry could dance, and he could sing.
Well, Uncle Hank was some good dust kids, wasn't he?
He was a good soul.
Oh, yes.
He was an uncle who was married to Mother's sister, and he was musical. He had never taken a music lesson in his life, and he could play the violin and mandolin and mouth organ. He used to play a drum and a mouth organ and a mandolin at the same time. The drum with his foot and the mouth organ. He had a business he had fastened on his shoulders. And the only thing, he couldn't sing when he was playing the mouth organ, but he could sing.
Yeah, I remember when we made a recording of him with Catherine. He was trying to get her to say something. She would say, then he started out, "Mensen je beliebt, wing the Pastor."
He could sing in
Norwegian. Yeah.
June 13th, 1948.
Okay, you ready?
Åh, mens jag var liten och ingenting förstå, bassirulla, mirulla, mirulla, mirejsa.
So we got Uncle Hank recorded.
Grandma had 6 children, and they were all married by this time, been married several years. And but she had, except for Uncle Walt, he wasn't married, and she had 6 grandchildren born that year. She had only 5 married children, but one of them had twins.
Yeah, 1910, and one of them was our brother Kenneth.
One was our brother Kenneth. He would be 87 years old the 29th of August if he were living.
He never grew to be a very big boy. He was small, very small.
He had a congenital kidney ailment, and even if he had it today, there would be nothing to do for this.
There's another picture of Chloris, but with a different brother.
That's right. This must be, you were probably 2 years old, and well, I'm 8 years older, so that makes me 10. So Grandpa took Kenneth to have his picture taken with him, and our mother didn't know anything about this. And when the proofs came in the mail, she was so surprised to see a picture of Kenneth with Grandpa taken at the photographer's shop.
This is a picture of the Burke family. Here is our mother, and there's Grandma Burke, and there's Grandpa Burke, and the rest of them are brothers and sisters.
Mother didn't go to high school. She lost so much schooling because she had tuberculosis of the bone, and she had many operations, and she'd be on crutches sometimes for months at a time, and she'd drive behind in school. So she went to school until she was about 17 years old, but she finally just lost interest. But our grandfather thought everybody should know how to earn a living. So while the other girls were teachers, what's Mother going to do? They sent her to a dressmaking school, and she learned to sew. And from that time on, until she was married, she went around to people's houses, and she would stay and sew. In those days, you couldn't buy ready-made pajamas or nightgowns or any underclothing that women wore. So Mother would stay at a house probably for a whole week and sew all the clothes that they needed until the next time they had her.
Some miniatures of Dad and Mom.
They were taken at the same photography shop on their 21st birthdays, but they did not know each other.
Huh.
So Dad's was taken about 3 years before Mother's
And where was this?
in Slayton, Minnesota.
You got them?
I never heard about the honeymoon. I think my father was farming, and I think maybe they went right to their old place then.
25th of November, 1990. Here's a picture I like, one of my favorites of Dad. This was one of his cars. It wasn't his first one, Chloris says. This one, I'm pretty sure, was a 1909 Model T Ford. 1919 Model T Ford.
Our mother said, well, tell me how to drive it. And he said, oh, the ladies don't drive cars. But it didn't take him long to find out that ladies did drive cars.
At least that one did.
There was a man grading the road, John Wilkinson.
John Wilkinson.
And past the house, past the farmhouse. Mother went out and asked him if he knew how to drive a Ford car. And he did. Our dad was out in the field working, but John Wilkinson came and gave our mother just one driving lesson. And she put our older brother Kenneth and me in a couple of boxes in the back seat. They didn't have children's seats in those days.
No safety belts.
No safety belts. So she gets in the car and she drove after. And she drove until she was about 75 or 76 years old, and she never had an accident.
Well, that must have been about 1924.
Probably.
Probably. I don't know if you can see that or not.
A little bit lower, Dad.
A little lower.
And that's taken in front of our farmhouse, back of the house, Rich.
3.5 miles northeast of Lake Wilson.
Is the name of the road, or does
Well,
it have a name?
No, we went a half mile east, just north of the lake, Lake Wilson, and then went 1.5 miles north, and then another mile east. And this is one, I think it's a neat picture of Dad. He looks so serious there.
He's 16 or 18 years old.
He's got a nice gold watch chain there.
Well, maybe
wonder if there's a watch on the other end of it.
Oh, there was.
This was, I think, at the 25th wedding anniversary of Uncle Walt and Aunt May. The pretty girl, well, that was the bride.
What did we call that? It was a
Mock wedding.
A mock wedding.
Mhm. And I remember too that I played a saxophone solo
Oh.
at the celebration.
Oh.
And I think it was "You leave me of all those endearing young charms."
Oh, I can't.
You remember that? The year I started was the first year for the motorized bus.
Is that right?
They had horse-drawn bus till that year. And who drove the horse-drawn bus?
Aunt Florence
Aunt
drove,
Florence drove
it.
that.
And I had to behave myself. And in the winter time, when the bus couldn't get through, we were taken to school on bobsleds. And it was cold, cold.
Oh, was it cold? Lots of days we go to school, it'd be 20 below zero, 25 below zero. They had a rule of thumb, though, that if it was 40 below zero and a strong wind, don't come, because we can't get the schoolhouse warm. And you couldn't call in to see if they were going to have school that day because the telephone lines were down all winter. But, oh, we went to school lots of mornings to get there, and the kids would have earlobes frozen, and the tip of their nose would be frozen, the toes would be frozen. You have to thaw them out before you, and the kids would sit there and stomp because their feet would sting so when they start thawing out. You taught from 31 to 38?
39.
39.
I taught 8 years. And my biggest salary was my last year. There were 115 of us country teachers in the county. I was the highest paid in the county, and my salary was $100 a month. In 1946, I found myself alone with the 2 children to support, so I had to do what I could do, and teach was the only thing I knew anything about. So I went to the School for the Deaf, and I got a job there. And at the same time, I was taking training at the university at Wayne State, and I taught there for the next 30 years. During that time, I got not only a master's degree, but I got a specialist degree. And the last few years, I taught, besides my class at the deaf school, I taught speech education at the university until 1976 when I retired. Well, I've often thought about when I saw Matthew at 1.5 years, that was the time, the age that Kathy was when I had to take her to my mother's. I really felt I had no choice. I could have taken the girls to Minnesota and lived with my parents, but it was just the time my father was retiring, and I just wouldn't do that to them. And I thought the easiest way for all of us would be for them to take Catherine. Gretchen was in school. She could be at home with me. And so my parents kept Kathy until she was old enough to go to school. I would see her at Christmas time and in the summertime. But she got excellent care, and I guess it didn't hurt her any.
No. I think Uncle Henry used to take her to, when he'd stop by the liquor store, he'd take Catherine there with him. One day, when Mother and Catherine were going into town, they were driving up the street, up to make a U-turn, and she said, "Grandma, let's go to the liquor store and get some yum and yime."
It isn't so funny to you because our grandmother, our mother was very dry, and she didn't know.
And Uncle Henry wasn't so dry.
On the farm through the 20s and the Depression.
Yes, through the Depression and the drought. Oh, we had some bad years on the farm. Not only were prices nothing, like corn 10 cents a bushel,
but
we didn't raise any corn.
And didn't harvest anything.
There were years we never took the binder out of the shed. There was just nothing there because we didn't get any rain. One other thing that I often think about is in the early and mid-20s, when things were flourishing and farmers were doing well, all the farmers around us bought more land, because you get more land, you raise more. But our dad didn't buy more land. He paid for the land he had. He had bought it earlier, and he got it all paid off. So when the crash came and prices were nothing and farming was terrible and the drought years came, we had our farm paid for. So we didn't owe any money. My dad didn't owe any money. Our dad didn't owe any money. And so we didn't have the worries that A lot of the other farmers had. They lost their farms. The bank foreclosed on them.
Many of them.
Many of them. And we were sitting there on a small farm, 120 acres. Most of the others were 160 or 320 acres, and they were going to make lots of money. But it turned out that was one of the very wise things our dad did. I don't remember the year he retired. I think he was probably about 60 when he retired.
Yes, the year he had his 59th birthday was his last year of farming.
And they lived on the farm then for several years after that, till he died. In fact,
Okay.
they were still living there when Dad died in 1954. And then he was 71 years old. So he'd been retired for about 11 years. They rented out the land, but lived in the house at the farm. And I think they had a good life during those years. Then they decided they should sell the farm and move into town. So they bought a little house in town. It was essentially a new house that had been finished a year or two earlier. And they were to move in on the 1st of November in 1954. And Dad had a heart attack in October. He lived about 2 days, and he died on the 18th of October. That was Myrtle's and my 13th wedding anniversary.
And then what year did Grandma Gass die?
Grandma Gass, let's see, she was 82 and she died in 1968. She died here in Greencastle. Yeah, and Chloris and I took the casket in our station wagon, hauled it back to Minnesota.